Bismillah ar-Rahman
In the
ar-Rahim.
name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate, good morning. I wish you a very nice and happy day and full of success in the discussions you are going to have in this fifth annual Gulf Studies Forum. I am Dr. Aziz al-Hurr, Director of the Diplomatic Institute in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I'll be happy to be moderating this session. This session will be about the Gulf crisis, the perspectives and the reasons, and some of the details of this crisis and the American position. And then we'll talk about the Saudi-American relations. There will be three topics by three panelists, who each of whom will be giving his point of view about this issue and how it is, how he sees it from his own perspective. What will enrich our discussions and these topics will be your discussions and your intervention that you will follow the presentations. We will begin with about the U.S., about the American position, with the presentation by Osama Abu Irshaid, who will be talking about the U.S. position on the Gulf crisis, background, reasons, and he has obtained his PhD in political science from the University of Ghabra. I beg you to understand that I beg the panelists that I will not go into the details of their bios, because I think that the participants want to listen to the participants, not to listen about them. So we will begin by the first paper about the U.S. position on the Gulf crisis, and then we'll go to the other paper, which is the U.S. Gulf relations and their transformations during the Trump presidency. And lastly, we'll be speaking about the U.S.-Saudi relations and regional changes with Dr. Abdullah Baabood. I give him the floor. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. You have 15 minutes, Mr. Osama. This paper will try to explain the confusion that has gone along with the way that the Trump administration had dealt with the Gulf crisis and the blockade imposed on Qatar since last year. We all remember what happened at that time when these three Gulf states imposed their blockades on Qatar, along with the help of the Egyptians, under the text that Qatar supports and helps terrorism and cooperates with Iran. This paper will also speak about the gradual transformation on the overall American position. Here I distinguish between Donald Trump's as a president position and the position of the American institutions establishment, because since the first day it was clear that there was a sort of division and that there was some hesitations, a sort of confusion, as we saw. This confusion, this reluctance was only became more coherent after 3 months or 4 months after the beginning of the crisis, let's say since September 2017, when we began to notice that Donald Trump is getting closer and closer, but very slowly, and then he sets back to the beginning of his position, which is proving this blockade and then changing his position. Now, if you want to speak about the chaotic situation, we find that the common factor is Donald Trump himself, because as I said, he would say express one position, and then later, a day later, he would express a contrary one that's quite contrary to the first one he announced. So Donald Trump, in his policies, whether domestic or external, counts on his own personal ideas, feelings, his instincts, more than depending on the advice he gets from the establishment. He always speaks about the deep states and the opposition he is facing from inside the state. This gives us an idea or an indication of where they were strong in this administration and why and how the establishment is working against him, because now I think when the crisis began, as I said, it began by approval from Donald Trump, but then there was a change, and there was the position of the establishment was against this crisis. Here, I want to go into details on three themes. One, how was the American position? The first theme will be the chaos. How the American position began. It was a very hesitant, reluctant position, and there was opposition, and the contrary of that position by the same president, with opposition contrary to what the Secretary of State would announce. So the second position was began to be seen formal theater. There was more reluctancy. Trump would say one thing and then would retreat from it and then say something that's contrary to that. Then we come to the third stage, which is a sort of balance in the positions. And as for the first theme, I want to say that there were four main topics in this. I can't go into all the details. If we take the first one, the chaos, we would explain that through four main topics. One, Trump's position regarding that, and the differences inside the administration, and then the role of Trump in undermining Tillerson efforts. We all remember that when the crisis began, it came only 3 days after Donald Trump's first external trip to Riyadh, where there was this Islamic Arab US summit, which was held in Riyadh, which was about two topics. One, combating terrorism, the second, containing Iran. Then after this summit, there was this penetration or infiltration into the Qatari news agency by announcing some statements on saying that this is what the Emir of Qatar said, which was really not true. And this, of course, was on the 5th of June, 2017. On the 6th of June, the next day, so the first day of this infiltration into the agency, there were some tweets from Mr. Trump, which referred to Qatar as a funder of terrorism and supports terrorism in the region, and spoke out to his visit to Riyadh and his meeting with the kings and presidents of more than 50 Islamic and Arab countries, saying this is the first indication that the summit was successful. When he spoke about funding terrorism, everybody pointed fingers to Qatar, so this is the beginning of the American action against terrorism in the region. So he was said to get the credit of this blockade imposed on Qatar at the time. What happened really is that this position of Mr. Trump since the Thursday was contrary to what he said the day of at the beginning of the crisis. He was in Sydney, and in a press conference, he encouraged the blockading countries to find a solution, and was against the blockade on Qatar, and spoke of the importance of the Eid Air Base, and he said that this helps USA to combat and to confront Iran and to combat terrorism, Daesh. And this, of course, this was the first impression, was that we are speaking about differences inside the administration, which is something that began right at the beginning of the term of Mr. Trump, where there were differences with NATO, with the European Union, with Germany, with France, with Canada, about and so there was this launching of commercial and economic wars against the allies. So we got used to that, the fact that Mr. Trump gives one position and then next day he gives the contrary of that. So Trump put out these tweets, and on the same day, the spokesperson, Sean Spicer of the White House, and on the same day gave a different message, saying that the United States wants to mitigate this crisis and to find an immediate solution to this crisis. And the same day, Donald Trump say something that is contrary to what the spokesperson of the White House said. And the Tillerson at the time, Tillerson at the day had a short statement in the State Department in which he spoke about the necessity of putting an end to the blockade and called Qatar to enforce and strengthen its policies in combating terrorism. But he also stressed the importance of putting an end to this blockade on Qatar. And the same day, in the press conference with the Romanian President, Trump once again accused Qatar of being funding terrorism, despite what the terrorism had said on the same day. And this statement was with the approval of Trump himself, as Tillerson said. So this proves that there's sort of chaotic situation. The second theme will be the background of this chaotic situation on the crisis. There are two reasons for this chaotic situation. One, that Mr. Trump has no real doctrine in foreign policy, and the role played by his son-in-law, Kushner. The first is that the absence of a real and clear doctrine for the foreign policy with Trump. He only his only motto is America first, and this has become a sort of doctrine which is part of the strategic national security of USA, which links enforcing security and building the economy along with strengthening the military power of USA. But this strategy, which was adopted by the administration, was not followed really by Mr. Trump himself. So even his motto of America First, he did not abide by it. So we said that he went into escalation of tensions with NATO, with the European Union, and once again, that because of the lack of competence and experience of Mr. Trump, and considering that the established that he rules over are one of the reasons of the weakness of the USA, we have told this is the first point and the reason for the crisis, that the absence of real foreign policy in USA, and this was reflected or translated into internal differences inside the station. That's why Trump sacked so many of his collaborators, and now he is even threatening to sack John Kelly and even Mattis. So this means that Trump has almost or is about to get rid of all the what we call the club of the adults club within the administration. No one of them has left, and now he is bringing in people who are more extremists, such as Pompeo and others. As for Kushner, many reports speak of his role. Play of his role in imposing this blockade on Qatar, and he could not get money from Qatar, and there's where the role of the Barrel, who he wanted to launch a war against what he called the radical Islam, and he couldn't distinguish between the moderates and extremists in the Islamic movement.
Now there is agreement inside the administration, which is the third title and the first theme. We've seen that there were disagreements. Trump, he would appear supporting the blockade while the administration would do something else. 4th of June 2017, after less than 2 weeks, there was a deal where the United States sold 36 planes with $12 billion. Some people may say that that deal was approved under the Obama administration, but for this agreement to go through within the first 2 weeks of blockade, there was a clear message. Also, there were naval exercises in the Qatari waters, You have only 5 minutes left. So the crisis kept escalating, and there were efforts to overcome disagreements with Tillerson. And Tillerson came in a visit in the region in June. That trip was a failure, although Qatar was the only country which signed an agreement to fight terrorism, but Tillerson were not able to convince the Gulf because Trump he came out rebuking the efforts of Tillerson. So this is another aspect of the chaos. Also, there was hesitation, and where Trump started to approach his administration and get closer, and there were other reasons that led him to change his narratives. The calculus of the administration. Qatar and the U.S. have strong and joint military relations since 1991, since there was a signing of military agreement, which was enhanced by the movement of the CENTCOM from Saudi Arabia, and which has 11,000 persons, American forces, and that has the longest truckways. It has a lot of details. So al-Udeid is a central base for in the region. So what are the reasons, what are the calculus that administration which opposed in the blockade of Qatar? First, they thought that they were worried that the retreat of U.S. would lead other forces like Russia and other forces to infiltrate the region. Also, the efforts to contain Iran and Daesh in the region, knowing that the U.S. had the focus on Iran, and also that was of course, after the efforts of Obama to withdraw from the country. Also, the exasperation of the crisis put the allies of U.S. on the brink of war, and many experts worried that the blockade of Qatar would have U.S. companies working in Qatar. Also, the issue which Qatar accused of supporting terrorism, the U.S. officials have actually asked Qatar to open that bureau for the Taliban and for the negotiations and support the negotiations in Afghanistan. All these factors led to the change of Trump attitude, and that we could witness in the autumn of 2017. There are reasons for this change, of course. To start with, there was a summit which he had with the Kuwaiti Emir Sabah al-Ahmed al-Sabah, and there was an impact on the 7th of September. After that, Trump called the Saudi Crown Prince, and he was able to establish connection between the Emir Tamim and MBS, and although he was leading, this effort to defuse the crisis, he came out criticizing Qatar in a press conference. And on September, we've witnessed that Trump is going towards praising Qatar and talking positively about Qatar and its efforts. And now the reasons that led Trump to change his attitude as well is the increasing worry in the U.S. that the failure in diffusing the crisis will increase the stability in the region. And of course, Russia is selling the S-300. Also, the accumulation of the crises in the region made it more difficult for the U.S. to control the crisis, the areas of crisis. When you remember targeted Syria. Also, we have Iran. Trump withdrew from the nuclear agreement, and the successful efforts by Qatar to get groups working for its benefits. Also, the Kushner relations with the Saudi Arabias and the questions marks that this relation imposed, and also the effort, the revelation of the espionage attempts towards the Qatari news agency. So he's out of time. We tried to catch up on the Q&A, so we finished the first paper, the American position from the Gulf crisis, and we have a common factor: President Trump, Dr. Shafeeq al-Ghabra, the U.S. Gulf relations and their transformation during the Trump presidency. He's a visiting professor at the center here and visiting professor at Qatar University, has many writings, studies, researches, and we would like he has 15 minutes, Dr. Shafeeq al-Ghabra. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum.
May God be upon you. It seems that we may repeat ourselves in many aspects, many fundamental aspects that which have been discussed in the session. In the paper that I want to discuss, and I wrote, there is a focus on the relation between, the series of crises in the presidency of President Trump, by the time he started his presidency in 2016. It appeared that President Trump is unconventional, and he's totally different from any other presidents. And I've tried really hard to remember other presidents, and I thought of Nixon, and he's different. President Nixon had this presidential character despite all the controversy from Watergate. President Trump is different, and lately I've tried, and I read a book, The Fear by Bob Woodward, and I found that Trump, coming from the psychological analysis, you have to take that factor into consideration when you evaluate his policies in the Gulf and the world and the region. So there is Bob Woodward that says that President Trump policies based on fear and enriching this fear and nourishing this fear. He has phobia, this phobia from Islam, from the colored, from the Hispanic, from the minorities. There is another dimension that the book mentioned, and that he doesn't, he's not honest, and I don't want to say that he's a liar, but he says he's saying one thing, and then he's saying the opposite completely, and he's quite elusive in a way that he can find a way out for him, and he doesn't follow or take the Constitution into consideration, the state position into consideration. So to start with, during his campaign, and we would like to talk about the Gulf here, he talked about that the Gulf countries need to pay for the protection they get, and he talked also that how can the American infrastructure retreated, and despite that the Gulf countries are paying double and triple when it comes to the security matters and buying arms and weapons from the United States, and not to mention about the dollar and dollar issues and investment. He only focused on a specific matter when it came to funding and arms deals. So once again, it seems that the controversy is a bit deeper. Let's talk about the different aspects that impacted the Khalij. Let's talk about the war in Yemen, which started in 2015. Of course, it started in the Trump administration, and it was very clear that the American administration, in one aspect, supported that war. But when things went out of control towards violations against the human rights and certain cases of death, high levels of fatalities among civilians, the White House come restrictions when it comes to arms sales to the coalition, and that happened during the Obama administration, and that decision was taken by, so the support came back to the war of Yemen, and to the point that we've reached now. We have a huge number of fatalities and life loss among civilians. When we talk about Yemen, it's not about part of the GCC, and when we see the catastrophic results of that war and the results that are unseen now, we can only understand the volume of the devastation. For President Trump, he's only selling arms, and that probably plays a role in his general policies in the region. But the ramifications on the Gulf and on Yemen will be catastrophic after the end of this war, which for me is not happening soon. So the war in Yemen, the different aspects related to that war, the Qatar crisis in Qatar, discussed by my colleague and many other colleagues. What I would like to add to that is the visit of Trump to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in May 2017 stirred something. It moved something towards a certain direction, and for me, it brought a curse to the region. As soon as he left, there was this media escalation, and then the real blockade in the 5th of June. But when we look at the crisis, the United States and the Gulf, what happened? Qatar went to Turkey. Turkey has a military presence in Qatar. It's the first time that Turkey has a military presence, which is not considered as a first world, a country from the first world, colonial power. It's not Anglo, it's not Saxon, and it's not a Portuguese, it's not the American power. There is a regional power since the fall of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, since the First World War, and it seems that there are new calculations, a new calculus of powers, and they will last. And I believe that these commitments are long-term, and new foundations will be built accordingly. That the Turks are present now. What happened in the crisis as well? For example, when you face an existential threat, you wouldn't just stay still watching. Of course, Qatar will start a dialogue with Iran, because Iran was very supportive, offered food and other supplies. Whoever imposed or started the blockade, who was aiming to blockade Iran, or did the other opposite thing, because Iran is more comfortable now. It's watching the division taking place while there is a dialogue. We also look at Oman and Kuwait. It was quite moderate. It was took the central position. Kuwait and Oman had the message as well that there is there is a rushness in taking decision by the Saudis and the Emiratis. Of course, we in most of the countries in the Middle East, we don't have real parliaments and real dialogue taking place. You know, in Iraq we had Saddam, we have figures taking decisions, and Gaddafi in Libya there was no real dialogue and discussion, and there is no way for the other opinion, and we can only look into our prisons and watch the political prisoners or the prisoners of conscience, because due to the lack of democracy in our countries, we fall into mistakes. So you still have we only have 5 minutes left. So what happened in the crisis that things, when we look at Kuwait, there is starting to some kind of coordination with Turks. There wasn't any military bases, but there is a coordination with the British as well. You know, we're inviting Britons to come over. So there is a lack of confidence in the White House, whether it was justified or not, but there is a feeling that the decision has been taken hastily. Of course, the withdrawal of the American from the treaty is scary. So Iran is quite comfortable dealing with the sanctions, and the sanctions actually weaken opposition. It's not weakening the government. Iran is quite accustomed to try to evade and avoid those sanctions, and we can watch that there is no international agreement on imposing more sanctions or reimposing the sanctions. The agreement, the treaty itself, has been reached by international agreement. So there. Also, the nuclear agreement, there is some kind of, shaking, and we have the Jamal Khashoggi assassination, the impact on the Gulf, on the intellects, on the Congress, on the midterm elections, also the debate that's happening in the Congress, which led into other discussions about Yemen, about also so we are under the scope now. The American Gulf relation is no longer with the White House. It is with the Congress, with the public opinion. It's a case of public opinion. It took another level different from the past. And I think we would feel that with the new Congress dominated by the Democrats, or the House, which is controlled by the Democrats now. So I have a few points about political money, but again, political money which focuses only on the White House or only targeting or directing PRO companies, the public opinion and the American press finds out that it's specialized in misleading information and faking news, imitating the Israeli lobbies is not working. It will not work for Arabs. We don't have for example, the Christian base that the Israeli lobby can use. So it's actually harmful for us who can actually use the political money. We are not addressing with the Muslims and the because we don't adopt the same cases as we used to do in the 70s. For example, in the 70s, during the 70s, all the Arab embassies were adopting and were, guarding the Arab cases. Let me conclude now. So, as my colleague said, I believe that there is a political security chaos. The latest is the assassination of Khashoggi. There is a tension, American tension. There is a fear from Iran, and there is a fear of Iraq. There is an internal chaos, and there is unknown. Of course, there is a new fear from American policies, from Trump, and this tendency in the administration to The feeling we get is the Gulf region has more than one conflict, internal, external, seen, unseen, within the region, and to be torn between the aspirations of people and what is legitimate. And as for us in the Gulf, there are no chances for development to peace without real development, without real changes in political and social cases, without real looking into freedoms and dealing with Iran, Iraq, and different countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE. We have to also to reconsider their positions. Everything will have an impact, and we have to look for the horizon of change. Without these changes, we are in tension, and we are heading into deeper ones.
Now we will be speaking about the transformations, Saudi-US relations in light of the regional transformations. A presentation by Dr. Abdullah Baabood. I also congratulate him on the occasion of the National Day of the Sultanate of Oman. And now Dr. Abdullah is a research and academic from Oman, and he used to work as a director of the Center of the Gulf Studies in the University of Qatar. So we welcome him and give him the floor. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Mr. Aziz, and I thank you all for being here, for inviting us. I think that this topic that we have been discussing since yesterday, and it's all about the Gulf states' relations with USA. And many aspects of this were discussed by the different interventions and the presentations of yesterday and this morning. This sort of repetition of some of the ideas that were mentioned previously. But I'll try not to do that and to say something new. As you know, the relations between Gulf and the USA are not something new. It is a strategic, important relationship for many years because there is a mutual interest for both. And this relationship is also considered a strategic one for both sides, for the US and for the Gulf countries. For the USA, the Gulf region is very important, vital strategy for its interests. When we speak about the US relations with the Gulf or the Arab region, they'll find that Saudi Arabia is at top of the most important countries in the region because of the status of the Saudi Arabia as a big producer of oil and has also its religious prestige in the Arab and Islamic world, which gives to Saudi Arabia another dimension. Saudi Arabia, USA, very much focuses on its relations with the Saudi Arabia, and as you know, this is a historical relationship. Yesterday, it was said that it began, in fact, in 1945 when Roosevelt met the founding king of Saudi Arabia, and this relationship went to different stages that were not always a seamless relationship or did not go through some crises. No, in fact, at some stages the relations were very special, and sometimes there were some crises and misunderstandings between the two sides. Some of these transformations are based on political transformations and changes in the dynamics of the region, and on the changing of the persons and the leaders in both countries, USA and Saudi Arabia. Here I am trying to focus only on the relationship on the recent years since Obama's administration and now President Obama's administration. I want to add something new to what was said before me. As you know, the relationship with Saudi Arabia has gone through several stages since the days of granting privileges to the oil companies to excavate for oil in the kingdom, reaching 1973 war that very much affected the relations, U.S.-Saudi relations, especially as the Arabs boycott was at the time on the effects of the Arab boycott on the U.S. and the world economy. But soon the two sides overcame these differences because they had a common factor that brought them together, which is the idea of confronting the Soviet Union and the communism in the region and the world, and also confronting the ideas of nationalist countries such as at the time in some Arab countries, and even confronting Saddam Hussein, reaching to the year 2003. And as you remember, there were the differences that led to the King Abdullah's refusal to visit Washington when there was this difference between the Saudi Arabia and USA about the position the USA took about the Arab-Israeli conflict, especially about Syria. One of the most important landmarks this relationship are the 9/11 attacks, in which a number of Saudi citizens led the attack, and that also led to the Gesta Act, which was put Saudi Arabia on trial, saying that because Saudi Arabia was officially accused of being behind this attack, or at least had something to do with it. The other landmark is the Arab Spring waves, which despite that some people think that at least there was a reference from USA, especially in Obama's famous speech in Cairo, and also the idea of Condoleezza Rice at the time about the creative chaos, this policy of creative chaos in the region. We must also keep in mind that at that time, Obama had stood with the Arab Spring revolutions and the rise of the political Islam, and was not against this. And this, of course, affected very much the relationship between Saudi Arabia and USA, especially about Egypt. The 30th January revolution in Egypt has changed many of the equation of the region. As for Saudi Arabia, and also for Arab countries, because Egypt is considered as the backbone of the region. And the success of the revolution there, and Hosni Mubarak's losing power, who was the friend to many leaders of the region, losing him was not something simple and for the region. And the U.S. is not taking a position against this, despite the fact that it supported the Arab revolutions. This was one of the main reasons behind the differences, especially at Obama's, with the Obama's administration, differences in Saudi Arabia and some Arab and the Gulf states. And there were also criticism from the United States to some of the policies adopted by the Saudi Arabia, especially because they thought that there was this intervention in the Arab Revolution and sending military forces to Bahrain, the Jazeera Shield, and even their role in the Yemen war. And we must keep in mind also that Obama, in his famous interview in the Atlantic magazine, accused the Gulf states, especially Saudi Arabia, that they are free riders. And there's a question that is Saudi Arabia a friend to USA? And when he was asked that question, he gave an ambiguous answer, saying that this is something complicated. And this, of course, is an indication of the relationship of Obama with the region and Saudi Arabia. And it reached to the point of calling, he reached the point that called the GCC countries to share with Iran the leadership of the Middle East region. And this was not something simple, really, because we know that there was this Iranian-Saudi conflict or competition issue on trying to dominate the region. And also at Omar's time, there was this orientation to the east, and that the Gulf region will be less important, and the Middle East only will not be less important for USA. And so there was this differences and priorities and visions between Obama's administration and that of Saudi Arabia, especially that Obama and the American administration at the time were thinking or focusing on their fighting Daesh and terrorism, while Saudi Arabia was focusing on combating Iran. So the good news for many Arab leaders was the Trump's coming to power. Before the elections, there were indications that there will be a big transformation in the American policies in the region, and but this not take place. He had bad speeches about Islam and his position regarding Iran and some of the issues of the region. This was in line with the Saudi Arabia's policies. We must keep in mind also that after his famous visit to the region, where he met with the leaders of Saudi Arabia and the other GCC countries and Islamic countries, and spoke about an Islamic alliance at the time, and then began sort of a change, a big change, and the differences between Trump's previous Obama's and Trump's policies, and in fact, Trump criticized Obama's policies in the region. So there's also the relationship became strong to some extent. There were, but because of short, I don't have time. You heard about the blockade on Qatar, and that there was some American support to the war in Yemen, and although it was criticized by some people, there's also the withdrawal from the nuclear deal and imposing sanctions on Iran. These were important factors for the Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia thinks that Iran is the main competitor in the region. And in fact, there's also some similarity in what's called the deal of the century, which is something still being prepared, and we don't know what details it contains. There's also the idea of creating a new alliances such as the Arab NATO. This also was Saudi Arabia welcomed this, but despite all this similarity of ideas, there were some differences between the two countries in different stages, including criticizing the Yemen war, and there's some arresting some of the political activists and some princes in Saudi Arabia and writers and other activists. And there was also differences that began to be seen between Saudi Arabia and Germany and other countries. All that affected the image or reputation of Saudi Arabia. Last of which, what we hear, as we know, about the issue of killing or the murder of Jamil Khashoggi, and how the Saudi Arabia managed this issue. In fact, we find that this agreement between the relations between Saudi Arabia and the USA, especially after Obama's era, which was very much criticized by Saudi Arabia, all this hope began to vanish, and now we are going through a very critical stage in the Saudi-US relations. How will that develop? Where will it go? Nobody knows. But I think the only thing that I can conclude with is that we are heading into a new era or stage, and after this, US-Saudi relations will be as they were in the past. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we will be moving to the other part of our discussion, Q&As, the question of please introduce yourself and your affiliation, and I do prefer that if there is a question is to be directed to one of the panelists and not to exceed 2 minutes for any speaker, and allow me to interrupt if you exceed time. Dr. Mohammed asked to have a comment. So if we follow the 2-minute rule, we'll have time to catch up with everybody. So, Dr. Mohammed, you have the floor. I have Mohammed Rumahi from Kuwait University. I have enjoyed the discussion, although personally I disagree with some of them. I have a question that I would like our colleagues and with their own wisdom to offer an answer to that question, and it is a hypothetical one. And I believe that in this session we have to discuss this kind of question. If there is, if Houthis control Yemen completely, is this region will stay in peace? Will all the wars end? You know, if we have a retreat of the Arab coalition with all its powers, and Houthis takes control of Yemen. It's a hypothetical question. I would like you, with your wisdom, to answer this question. This is question number one. Question number two, or comment. I believe in the Gulf region we have to think about the motto. We have to scratch our skin or scratch our neck. If that makes any sense, we have to do our own business.
أنا عندي 3 نقاط سريعة ويمكن فيها أسئلة.
I have 3 points. The first one, when our dear brother Osama and Dr. Shafeeq, I would wish that they would shed a light about the priorities of the American policy, America first, and how can America come first, and there is also a priority for other allies and friends, even in the foreign policies, allies normally there is a lack of trust. Where is the importance of the Middle East as well? Where is the Middle East from all that, and the strategy or the mentality of Trump? Doesn't enjoy a priority. The priority is on the deal of the century and the Arab-Israeli conflict. And despite that, the deep state focus on that, the crisis in the Gulf negatively affect the interest of the United States. Also, the conflict we have between the deep states and between institutions. And let us follow the leaks by the CIA and by the Congress. There is a conflict. How is that reflected on the foreign policies of President Trump, where he claims that he's a nationalist, not an internationalist? And this is a serious development, President W.H. Bush, he was an internationalist. He passed. Yeah, there is another one for Dr. Shafeeq. Dr. Yunus Dalal from the Strategic Studies Center from the Qatari Ministry of Defense. I have a question for Osama Abu Irshaid. The lack of doctrine in the American policy. He mentioned that it came from America first, as announced by President Trump. But what is the position of the Congress from the strange policies in the region, away from the American interest? Does the Congress approve that? I don't believe that the authorities given to any presidents, specifically the American president, will allow him to do that, moving the American embassy into Jerusalem. That was a very dangerous, serious decision that created a lot of debate in the Middle East, and also about the dimension of fear at Trump. I don't believe that present, because he took very bold positions and decisions even against the American interest. That doesn't lead us to think that he has this worry or fear from repercussions. I believe that it seems to me that he's not fond of Arabs and Muslims. Okay, thank you very much. The real problem is that Dr. Ghabra actually tackled in his remarks. He said that, and it's known to us that the problems will continue with the lack of democracy. The real problem for the reason for problems for the crises in this region is the lack of democracy. There is a very small elite making decisions on behalf of those peoples, and lead the peoples of these countries in the region into catastrophe. For example, we have a few people in Abu Dhabi and Riyadh that took the decision. Also, whoever took the decision of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi could be one person. And look what happened. The discussion must focus on democratic reform. This transformation that seemed to be possible in January 2011, but it seems that the potentials, the chances are dissipating, taking into consideration to what happened in Egypt. My question is, how can the Gulf countries in this region can peacefully transformed into constitutional monarchies without a big, serious, disbalance. We've seen what happened in Egypt and the opposing revolution. How can we benefit from the Gulf crisis? The question is clear. Thank you so much.
Congressman, just very briefly, for all of you who have heard the phrase America First, please actually read the documents. The emphasis on strategic partners are filled in the contents of both of them, and they're both on the web, the National Security Strategy and the National Defense Strategy. And America First is defined as a return to American leadership. President Trump is a problem. And here I would address a question to any of the three panelists. Remember that this is, to some degree, about counterterrorism. When you have looked at this, have any of you looked at the changes in the Treasury list that is perhaps the best unclassified list of the problems we have with Arab countries in dealing with counterterrorism, and the revisions in that list that occurred as a result or after the dialogue following the boycott on the subject of terrorism? And did you look at the changes in the annual State Department report on terrorism? Because remember, when you talk about U.S.-Arab relations, one of the absolute cores is what progress is being made in counterterrorism and counter-extremism. And this is a function not only of what the U.S. has in these documents, but compliance with the UN Accords on Counterterrorism. And in these areas, there are many problems, not simply with Qatar, but with other Arab states. I don't expect you to agree with the United States, but if you're going to study this subject, you have to study compliance on counterterrorism in detail, not simply look at Mr. Trump's rather strange eccentricities, because a lot more changed.
Thank you for your remark, please.
I have one question for Dr. Osama, and I'm confident that the answer will be a professional one, away from any emotions that we probably... Sorry. So my question, I have a question for Dr. Osama. Do you think that the team of the Congress is serious in neutralizing MBS? This is the first question. My second question, are there any guarantees for that team within the Congress that this neutralization and the power transformation is seamless and it wouldn't lead to the collapse of the Saudi state, which will be catastrophic? I would like to hear from you. My last question for me, as direct observers, and especially for Saudis abroad, till this time we are watching a systematic hypocrisy when it comes to the reforms in Saudi Arabia. Do you agree with this point? Okay, sir, you are next. Osama Abdullah Baabood. When I think of America as free Egypt, I would like differentiate between the great America العظيمة, which is a symbol for freedom, America for Lincoln, Roosevelt, with George Washington, and between Trumpistan, which Trump transformed into a brokery or a part of Wall Street. When we deal with the Americans, we would like also to speak. But they think that they see that we enjoy slavery. We always tell them, stop supporting tyrants, leaders, rulers. Instead of sending weapons to kill us, send us technologies to develop our countries and to fight and tackle terrorism. It's our fault because our rulers, they send money to America rather than spending our fortunes and money on developing the countries. I have 2 points, 2 remarks when it comes to political reality as reflected by the midterm election. Trump was still enjoying wide support since the foundation of the United States. Until now, only 4 administrations that the White House were able to control all the Congress, Senate and the House. So Trump is an exception, been exceptional for the Republicans to keep the Senate and to win 3 more seats, unlike Obama, where Obama and George Bush, when the Democrats were able to control 1 part of the Congress. So Trump enjoyed more power. So when we look into the leaders and the presidents of the United States, it's very clear that he is isolationist. And America is contained with its human and natural resources, doesn't need any other country. And that's what actually moving Trump today, and that's one aspect of America's first. So going into square one, our dependence on the United States should be less. Development of the political mindset when it comes to dealing with the crisis should be in a better way, whether it was on the Arab League or the GCC country.
Actually, I have a question for one of the panelists, or it's a general question. When we speak about Gulf-US relation, I guess there is always a third part, which is somehow hidden, but which is always in the picture, which is Israel. And historically speaking, Israel has been used by the Gulf countries as a way to please the US and as a way to reach out to the US. But lately, I guess we witnessed a new phenomena, which is, a rapprochement with Israel, which is based on more strategic ground, as a way to, of course, form a coalition against Iran. And also, I have the feeling that among some liberals in the Gulf, there is a trend to view Israel as a symbol of modernity. And among those people, I get the feeling that a lot of them are attracted to Israel as, I would say, a symbol of technology, modernity. And this is, it's appearing in the way they talk about Israel and so on. So my question is the following. Would you say that the current rapprochement between the Gulf state and Israel is something that is completely opportunistic, and that is something that will one way in the coming future, or are we witnessing something more long-term, something more deeply rooted?
The question is very clear. Thank you very much.
My question is for Osama and Dr. Al-Ghabra. Is America concerned about diffusing the crisis in the region, or just to manage it, to use the fortunes of the region? And the media also always talk about the American friend. Is America dealing with the region as a friend, or in a different manner? Okay, thank you so much. I have a question for Dr. Shafeeq and Dr. Osama. Do you think touch on the new to divide the region on a racial and racial basis and to take the region into new military conflicts, multi-front confrontations? You know, the region based on its maintain its security on foreign powers. So there we have a new project in order to enhance the local security of cities. You know, and with the lack of comprehensive Arab projects in managing fortunes and relations and find solutions for the security problems that we suffered from for a long time. So now we allow the panelists to comment on. Each panelist will have 3 minutes. We'd like to start with Dr. Okay, so Dr. Muhammad, so 3 minutes, he will not have time to answer. So the problem with Yemen, it didn't start with the war at all. So you are trying to waste my time. You are taking us. This is the problem in Yemen didn't start with war. I would like to answer the question. The problem in Yemen started when the uprising happened, the revolution, and there was the Gulf Agreement, the return of Saleh, and then there was the attempt to isolate Muslim brotherhoods, which allow the Houthis to take control, and things deteriorated. And Houthis were trying to take control. I believe the aim was to involve to Saudi Arabia. Whoever started that war thought that this war would only last for 2 weeks. And the answer is clear. The war in Yemen shouldn't have happened in the first place, and there were other options. Even if Houthis took control, like sanctions, blockade, pressure, negotiations, calls, threats, with certain things, without engaging in a war, which that is actually leading to this catastrophe. So this is my answer to this question. The other question: how can we scratch our neck? Yes, we need a clear, open dialogue to be able to tackle our own affairs. I believe that what I can see is that there is no time for, there is no way for dialogue. There is no leeway for other opinion. As for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there is no real talk about the serious problems about refugees, the blockade on the siege on Gaza, also moving the embassies from President Trump. There were no reactions. Who said that the Gulf countries have other opinions? It's not allowed. Come to Kuwait if you wanna see other opinion, the counter opinion. You know, there in other places there is the other opinion, the counter opinion has no space. It's not allowed. We don't have the dialogue, the real dialogue that will give us the chance to have other opinions. So, Dr. Abdullah, I was very lucky that not many people asked me questions. So maybe you have 1 minute. I would like to say that a big part of the problems in the region is to have this authoritarian state. In the Arab countries, we are still controlled by the mentality of the tribe, or medieval mentalities, despite all the appearances of modernity. So these countries that are in conflict with their leaders, they try to use others and blame others for their own failure. You know, the United States, whether it was the United States or the West in general. Of course, the superpowers and the other superpowers in the region, we attributed everything wrong happening here to those countries. Of course, not not the United States, not any other country cannot move without national interest. Each state has its own national interest. They have a basis and they have certain values, but their national interest, they try to achieve. When they see an entity like the Arab world, which is quite fragile, weak, and conflict, imposing sanctions on each other, filled with racial conflicts, of course, they will try to use that weakness and to serve their interest. I didn't discuss oil because we have a paper for one of my colleagues which will discuss that. Of course, the Gulf countries as a big exporter of oil, that changed the equation, of course.
There were a number of questions. Some of them are intermingled, in fact. As for US, America First, Trump's vision to America First is a contractual vision. When he speaks about transactional transparencies and policies, all transactional, all contractual transactions. He speaks of payments all the time in his relations with NATO or with the Arabs or even with the European Union or China. He always looks into mutual interest and benefits. Yes, he says America First, but it's not necessarily that he's on the same page with his administration in this, and you find that after the pressure from the administration, and this has become part of his administration's doctrine, he goes another way. وهذا يأخذني إلى النقطة التي أثارها سيد كورتسمان. ليس لدي وقت أشير لك كل شيء، لا اعتماد علينا أن نقبل. أنا مواطن أمريكي أيضا، لماذا نقبل بأن العلاقات العربية الأمريكية يجب أن تكون تستخدم لمحاربة الإرهاب وتمويله؟ هذا الأمر بدأ منذ إدارة كلينتون. الأمر بدأ منذ إدارة كلينتون. الشيء الوحيد الذي نراه هو أن نوسع هذا المفهوم ونوسع القائمة، وهذا يتطلب أن نحدد علاقتنا بناء على هذا التوسع. أعود إلى النقطة السابقة. نعم، ترامب يقول أمريكا أولا، لكن لا يعني أنه يفهم ما تعني ذلك. الإدارة ربما تفهم ذلك، المؤسسات تفهم ذلك، لكن أما تعود الأمر له فهو فقط بالنسبة لهذه علاقة تعاقدية. هذا كل ما يراه. As for Dr. Mohammed, yes, I do believe that there are some attempts inside the American administration, inside the establishment, to get rid of Mohammed bin Salman. They don't want him. Not necessarily the report, Reuters report about 2 weeks ago about the movement inside the royal family and what they have heard that the Americans said that if you can get rid of him, we will not project. But there are differences between with Trump and Kushner. What's important is the New York Times report that how Mohammed Salman brought in and the role he's playing, because Mohammed Naif was closer to CIA. But Mohammed Salman was closer to Trump. Thank you, Mr. Salman. The was difficult role to play is to be moderating a session where there are such big personality as panelists and as audience. So I cannot give what I don't have. This is the time that was allocated to us. Outside this session, I'm a much better person. I'm not so tough and rough. So please excuse me if I had stopped some of the colleagues from talking and interrupted some of them, so I'm sorry. Thank you.